Hey everybody, welcome to another video review. Man, this is going to be like a nice timeline when I look back on how long I've had this stupid cough. I had a cold like just weeks ago and I'm over it now, but this nagging, kind of the semi-productive, annoying cough still remains. It's from the winter of 2023, guys. Winter 2023 into 2024. Everybody's got this stupid, annoying cough going on. I'm no exception. And so, sorry for the occasional little coughs in the middle of this review. But here we go. The year's 2001, I believe. And that's when The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring came out. I was just starting actually my residency training as an intern in head neck surgery. And I was always a little bit of a Tolkien fan. I mean, obviously, if you're a nerd in school, you know, Tolkien is going to be kind of, you know, Lord of the Rings, a part of what you're into. And it was one of those books where you read it when you're younger, just to sort of read it for the story, the characters, what's going on. But when you first read it as a young adult, you probably don't really understand kind of the layers of it, you know, the complexity. You're just there to enjoy sort of the story, right? The travels of the One Ring and what it took to, you know, to destroy the One Ring and to defeat Sauron. But then as you read it again as an adult is when you begin to really appreciate kind of the lore and the language of Tolkien, right? Who's an Oxford Don of Linguistics. And you appreciate the language so much more, you know, every time you read it as you get older. And later on, you know, if you dare, you progress to the Silmarillion. And then if you want to go even one step further than that, you start reading Christopher Tolkien's, you know, treatise on his father's work with the history of Middle-earth. I do admit that I never got further than the first volume of the history of Middle-earth, which was actually primarily concerned with the lore of, the Silmarillion. It was pretty dry work. I mean, this is the sort of stuff that you could do like a thesis, like a master's or a PhD thesis on, if you really wanted to delve that deep. But anyways, it's to say that I did have, you know, more than a passing knowledge of The Lord of the Rings as a novel at the time. And so, you know, I watched The Fellowship of the Ring on the big screen, and I just remember how, you know, I didn't know what to expect. I had seen like the Ralph Bakshi, you know, animated picture when I was very young. And that was kind of the extent, right, of like adaptation of the novel. And I didn't really know what to expect, but that first movie just completely knocked my socks off. And, you know, it quickly became one of my favorite movies. And at the time, you know, when I watched it, the thought never entered my mind that you could have collectibles and statues from that movie. In fact, it wasn't until the extended edition of The Two Towers came out, I think maybe the following year or two, maybe 2002, 2003, thereabouts. And in that extended edition, they actually had an additional, like special edition of that even. And it came with a statue of Gollum. And as part of the DVD set, there was a DVD that talked about Sideshow, Weta, and the statues that they had been making for The Lord of the Rings. And I watched that DVD and I went to the website, as I'm sure many, many countless others did. And that was sort of when I was first introduced to Sideshow, Weta, the company. So that's kind of my long roundabout way of giving you a 20-year backstory for finally getting this epic piece. This is the Balrog of Moria, the original from Sideshow Weta. And it's here, a limited edition of 1,000. So much history to talk about. First of all, when you watch The Fellowship of the Ring, the Mines of Moria sort of dominate the entire movie in terms of the action. It's like frankly insane, right? Like in that one sequence, you have the incredible battle against the cave troll, and then the escape with from all of those orcs, right? Like the orc army. And then, of course, the introduction of the Balrog himself. It's just so iconic 20 years later, so epic. And so obviously when you found out that Sideshow Weta actually made a statue of the Balrog, I mean, it was just insane. Like, you really wanted this one. Like this one and the cave troll, that original cave troll, were the two that really sort of captured, the imagination. It was on the get list of so many fans across the world. Now, Sideshow Weta, and I'm not going to belabor the point. We'll go through this pretty quickly. Sideshow Weta was a partnership created from Weta, the actual special effects company that made all the special effects and the props for the Lord of the Rings trilogy from New Zealand, and Richard Taylor. Now, Sir Richard Taylor, by the time Richard Taylor is the director of Weta. And Sideshow was a company in the United States that at the time delved mainly in 12-inch 1/6 scale figures, well known at the time for their Universal, Monsters series, as well as garage kits. I think the guy by the name of Tom Gilliland was the person who started Sideshow. And so they formed this partnership. I don't know who approached who, whether it was Sideshow or Weta, or how they even found each other. But the decision was made at the time for Weta to, of course, contribute their vision, their molds, their sculpts, because they were, after all, the company that made the special effects for the movie. And then Weta would and the Sideshow would kind of be in charge of the marketing and the manufacture, the packaging and the sales and all of that stuff. And so for that period of time of that relationship, which, was there for basically, I think, as long as the movies and the extended edition DVDs, that was, about 3 to 4 years. They created many, many different collectibles, and they were the first wave of collectibles from the Lord of the Rings. Later on, when Weta and Sideshow split, and they both made collectibles separately. And since then, the collectible license for Lord of the Rings has gone on to many other companies. Prime One, J&D managed to get some, Infinity Studios. So it kind of, began to propagate, and different companies have kind of given their own particular take on the Lord of the Rings property. But back then, Sideshow Weta was the only place to get Lord of the Rings collectibles and statues. And this was like the daddy of them all. In fact, that's like the nickname of this piece. They call it the Daddy Rog, right? Or the Big Daddy Balrog, or just Daddy Rog for short, because, the Balrog was the baddest ass collectible and everybody wanted it. It quickly achieved Grail status among Lord of the Rings fans. And Grail is, of course, used way too easily in modern statue collecting. Everything's a Grail, but this was truly, a Grail for us, because at the time they made 1,000, which in statue limitation, 1,000 is a lot of pieces. Okay, it's a lot of pieces. However, when you think about the global phenomenon that was the Lord of the Rings at that time, and the international nature of it, and especially the subject matter. And this was the only Balrog, by the way, guys, available. Like, this was it. You could not get a Balrog any other way. This thing sold out, like, just immediately, the drop of a hat. And so by the time I, who was a latecomer to the game, who, remember, didn't even know about Sideshow Weta until I saw the Two Towers extended edition. Think about how late that is. I mean, like, the extended edition came usually about, I think, 4 to 6 months after the movie released. So we're talking about the Fellowship of the Ring movie coming out, the extended edition, and then the Two Towers the next year releasing, and then about 4 months after that. I didn't get knowledge of this until way later. By the time I found out about this was long sold out. So for those of you who want to know, the initial MSRP back in 2001, 2, 3, or whatever, this thing cost like $300. Okay, $300, which at the time was the most expensive piece that Sideshow Weta produced. Okay, and it rapidly became more and more expensive. I mean, this Balrog was featured in like a video game magazine that I looked at. That was how popular it was, and people were saying at the time, it's hilarious, but people were saying how 300 is kind of pricey, but it's worth it because this looked so cool and so amazing and blah blah blah. Well, the story. I mean, by the time I sniffed it, it was well over $1,000, which when you're like sort of just graduated from medical school with all your debt and you're making minimum wage as a resident, 1,000 might as well be 10,000. So there was just no way I was going to come anywhere close to buying this. And then as the years passed, in the I would say 7-8 years after the movies had all come out, I mean, this thing continued to just skyrocket, because at the time, again, there was just no Lord of the Rings collectibles high end. I mean, this was it, and there was no other Balrog. And this thing quickly rose to like the $2,500 mark. $2,000 to $2,500 was the neighborhood of how much this thing eventually sort of plateaued out. And even then, it was not easy, to acquire. Sometimes Sideshow Weta will put on like an auction for an artist proof, which we'll get into in a bit. But just very, very rare. And at that point, I just kind of had given up hope of ever getting one of these. Okay. And now, of course, as time went on, Sideshow knew how much people wanted this, how they missed out. And they had, they tried to come up with, other versions so that, people could still get a chance. They came up with a smaller version called the Flame of Udun, which I had briefly and I sold. But the Flame of Voodoo in Balrog was way smaller than this and nowhere near as cool. And then later on, years later on, Weta came out with a much bigger Balrog with a flaming sword. And I have reviewed that on my channel, which I think is actually, if you want to be really honest, in many respects superior to this one. But nostalgia and, of course, legacy, this is still considered to be kind of the king of the Balrogs, when it comes to like a full statue, not just a bust. This is still considered the original and the most highly desirable. So the limitation is 1,000, and then it's a little bit, I think, debatable how many artist proofs were made. Artist proofs are usually either, there's two different interpretations or uses of artist proofs. So one is to actually, one are basically statues outside the limitation given to the factories in China to give them something to refer to as they're doing paints, right? So there's usually a couple of artist proofs sent to the factories for that purpose. And then other artist proofs, and I think this is how Sideshow Weta used them, were just an additional number set aside to give to important people, to VIPs, to industry insiders, for charities. They're sort of like an extra little hedge against more demand later on. And they had, artist proofs for quite a bit of their pieces. So rumor has it that about 75 artist proofs of this thing exist out there in the wild. And that is how I got mine. I got mine as an artist proof. I'm not gonna lift this whole thing up. It's really heavy. I don't want to disassemble him, but at the bottom, very, very beautifully, is the base of these old Sideshow Wetas. It says it's artist proof Balrog, and sculpted by Ben Wooten, Wooten, I believe, who crafted this masterpiece. And I got it for an incredibly good deal. Prices had fallen somewhat with the releases of other Balrogs. For instance, Prime 1 Studios had the great diorama of the Balrog against Gandalf on the bridge. And of course, Queen Studios had the completely insane life-size Balrog bust that's so big, that's essentially bigger than a human being. And so that had kind of somehow blunted a little bit of the value. But, to tell you the truth, and amazingly, even 20 years later, this thing has not fallen too much below 2,000, to be honest with you. And when I looked at eBay listings, there really wasn't that many previously sold. And out of nowhere, this company, within half an hour of Ontario, within half an hour of where I am, they found a couple of these. And whenever you see a couple of artist-proof Balrogs out there, especially without numbers, you're always suspicious it might be recast, right, or knockoffs. But this seemed unbelievably legit. I mean, he just said, hey, you know what? It's everything. The original brown shipper, original color box, all sealed. There didn't seem to be anything wrong with it. He offered it for a pretty decent price. And if you looked at his other listings, he did have quite a few older sideshow statues from different, genres, like an old artist-proof James Bond, Sean Connery, ones that I had owned 20 plus years ago. And so I decided to take a chance. I bought it for a very good price. By my count, $1,400, $1,400 and then some tax. And I arranged local pickup, didn't have to ship it. And so I drove all the way there, and he was away on business. I never met him. He had given it to one of his friends who was not in the statue business at all. So it was pretty hilarious. I was driving. So I drove to sort of the warehouse where his friend worked. We'd had exchanged information. He was ready for me. He brings out this brown shipper, which was just like literally amazing. Like it looked like a brand new box. It looked like literally that just boxed it. It's like a time capsule that just boxed it, in China in 2002 or something. I never seen a brown box so pristine. All the corners were just completely sharp. It had Balrog, Balrong, which is another great joke. This was a mistake made by the Chinese factories all the way 20 plus years ago. Some people actually thought that because of Balrog, that that was like a sort of a giveaway that maybe the product was fake or a recast or a knockoff. But in actuality, all of the brown shippers have Balrog, believe it or not. So, I get it. And then, of course, I didn't want to leave until I inspected it. And so, the guy kind of just watched over me. He helped me as I opened the brown shipper. And you see the plastic bag completely sealed and flattened. It looked like, again, brand new. Took the bag out. Again, very legit, did not look like a knockoff at all, not a recast at all. Or if it was, it's a recast from the factory. The original factory who made this must have done it because it looked completely perfect and legitimate. I take the bag, put the bag down, open up the color box, and then we get the styrofoam out. I cut it open. You see the exact same paper that Sideshow Weta used to protect their statues. I know, of course, because I bought quite a few Sideshow Weta collectibles, back in those days. Exactly the type of paper you would associate with them. I bought busts and statues. So again, 100% legit. The whip completely immobilized against a little piece of cardboard, you can see, and then they made a belt to hold it in place with paper, fragile, everything just absolutely, what you would expect from a real Balrog. The base, brand new on the bottom. And so I inspected it. There was no obvious damage, cracks or anything like that. And then, I wasn't going to replace it into the brown shipper. I was just going to put it, because once you open it, you don't want to redo it too much without being very careful. You don't want there to be any damage. And then, bless his heart, the guy, completely oblivious to all of this, without, just completely straight-faced, asked me if he offered to throw away the brown shipper as well as the color box, because I was just moving the foam into the back of my car. So he thought that he would just do me a favor. He said, "Hey, do you want me to get rid of this? Do you even want this?" And I politely told him yes. I would like to keep the color box and the brown shipper. So that was just, of course, completely adorable that this gentleman was so, I guess, naive to the nature of collectibles, that to him, this was nothing. To him, this was just basically a toy, like a toy you buy from, I don't know, Walmart or Toys R Us when they were in business. And right, of course, when you take the toy out, you're going to throw away the packaging. And that's what he sort of assumed. But no, I brought that home, and then I took the base, installed him on it, and then got the whip in position. So I couldn't be more pleased to finally have this after 20 years, if you can believe it, of thinking that this was beyond my grasp. Forever, I managed to get this, and for I think a very, very wonderful price, especially for an artist proof. I don't care about artist proofs any more than numbered editions, but some people do, and it's nice to have them. And to have a artist proof Balrog of all things, and have this opportunity to essentially drop into my lap, just from kind of looking at eBay auctions, finding that one or two have been sold, and then messaging the guy and just saying, "Hey, do you have maybe one more?" And he said, "Well, I have one more. It's my last one." And he had to take a couple of days to look for it. He didn't remember. He thought he had one more, but he wasn't sure. And so, for that opportunity to present itself is just sort of amazing. And I still can't quite believe I'm doing a video review of this wonderful piece. So that's the story behind how I acquired an artist-proof Sideshow with a Daddy Rog. So now we can actually get to the review itself. I hope that while I've been rambling and talking, that you've been able to enjoy some of the shots. And it's interesting when you see this on eBay auctions, when you see this on photos, it doesn't really prepare you for seeing it in person, both I think the good and the bad. It's very deceptive. And so I'll go through some of these things first. So the first thing that's very deceptive is just how small it is, okay? Compared to modern day statues, even from Weta themselves, and Sideshow with their premium formats, and everybody's going bigger and more impressive, like Prime One Studios, for instance, is famous for that. This is just like a very classic statue and a symbol of a bygone era in statue production, where the companies didn't have the confidence to do something this crazy. They don't have $1 million to invest and throw away on a Balrog bust the size of your Honda Civic. Okay, guys, they weren't there in 2001. This entire market was completely virgin back then. Nobody knew what was going to work, what wasn't, and bankruptcy was waving their hand at you around every corner. So they were a lot more conservative with their pose, with their size. And so look at this, look at my hand on the base. It just gives you an idea of how small it is, compared to everything else that's going on. So we have it in front of you. Your first thought is, oh, wow, this is pretty small, right? It's even smaller than the Weta Balrog that was released over a decade later. And I'll definitely do a video comparing the two of them side by side, so you can take a look. So the first thing is, kind of how small it is. The second thing for me that struck me is how sort of dull the colors are. Because in my imagination and from the movie, I'm just thinking about the Balrog bursting to fire. I'm thinking about, flame. I mean, he's called the Flame of Urun, right? And that's what dominates your memory when you see the movie, when you see Fellowship of the Ring. And then when you see photos on, eBay, and you see the color box of this thing, your eyes are sort of, taken by the flames on the back of the Balrog, his flame whip, obviously the flames in the mouth. But when you actually have it in front of you, you realize that much of it is actually, kind of like volcanic ash. It's way darker. It's black, actually, if you were to look closer. And the glow is way more subtle. As you can see, I'm trying to get a little bit closer. You can see that it's a lot more subtle where the red is, and the red of the wings and all of that along the tail. So quite a bit more kind of dull, muted colors, okay, compared to what your imagination may be, which is cool. You get to see kind of a lot more of the detail. And it is kind of nice that the Balrog is not like, like garish. We don't want garish colors, right? So those were kind of the things that really struck me as I put them together. I also really like the fact that it's so simple. Again, you have a base, a Balrog, and then you have the hand with the flame whip. That's it. It's 3 pieces. It's a simpler time, but it doesn't make it any less awesome. Another thing that was really cool, which I have a little bit of a harder time showing you, is the base. And so Sideshow Weta's bases back in the day were all like this. They kind of had a little bit of a floor that, makes sense with the context of the statue. And it's always on this kind of oval black base. And it has, the name Bella. I can't even, hold on a second. Let me just try to go, focus in just a little bit. So, Belaguer, or no, Belaguer, I guess is the name of the, one of the names of the land. And if you look really closely, so I'm zooming, you see all this rubble. So this is, of course, from the mines of Moria. I see it's crashing through. And you clearly see the body of a Moria orc. You can see actually the Moria orc sword. That's very, very famous. He's buried under the rubble. And so it's really nice to see that. It's very easy to miss, okay? And the reason for that is because, well, you never would look at that. The photos are always concentrated on the Balrog. It just sort of, skims over the base. But this is a very, very nice detail of the base, actually, that, most people would miss. And that little dead orc is so important because it gives you a sense of scale of the Balrog. Because again, the entire Balrog statue is pretty small. And so it's important to give an understanding of the size. And they did this by, basically showing you that dead orc. So I think that's really cool. I'm gonna try to zoom in a little bit more so you can kind of see as I'm rotating it under the light. You can see sort of the hair, the helmet, the arm, and then the sword. You can see some of the skeletal features. So I think that's actually, really neat to be able to essentially capture that. I'm gonna see if I can just zoom in a little bit more. Right there, I know it gets really, really blurry, but there you go, you can kind of see the helmet, all of that. All right, so we're gonna get back, zoom on out. So, pretty simple base, but you have, again, sort of the hint of the map etched into the base. In the Balrog's case, more of the map is sort of taken up by the floor of the Mines of Moria, but here you can see the hint right over here. There's Mordor right here. It's the map. And then, what is it? Khand in the east. So the map is etched in the black base, and over that you have, of course, your regular base. So moving to the Balrog himself, we already talked about, sort of the detail. So one of the other things that you have to understand is that Balrog is a demon of flame. And so their concept when they created him, or the design, was that, he would be created from lava. So this is essentially what they imagine molten rock to be. He's supposed to be this demon that's essentially of molten lava. And so I think they did a great job showing you the rock that's black, and then inside the rock is all of this heated, lava, like kind of, shining through, and that's what they wanted to show with the actual beast. And you can't really see this very easily in the movie, right? Because the movie's got all the CGI, all the special effects. And what's more impressive in the movie, I love the sculpt, because the sculpt actually shows you their initial design, how they sculpted it, all the detail of the sort of the musculature and the craggy surface. And this is kind of more, more easily or more thoroughly demonstrates what their vision was when they created him. So that's one of the nice things about having basically a statue from the company that made the Balrog. And I think Ben Wooten, usually what they did was they made the guy who actually sculpted the piece for the movies, he or she was also the lead sculptor for the Sideshow Weta statue. So there is that extra little aspect of authenticity. Like no matter how great it is these days, where Prime One, some guy working for Prime One is basically sculpting a Balrog in the computer. Everything is computer sculpted, 3D artist, printed out. But this will always be special. Sideshow Weta's line will always be a little bit special because they were hand sculpted back in the day. 2002, there wasn't any 3D printing, guys. There wasn't any computer ZBrush, any of that. It was hand sculpted by the guy who actually hand sculpted the maquettes and the stuff for the actual movie. So you feel a little bit of that lineage, when you own one of these things. And even though, it's not quite as huge, maybe not quite as ambitious, but still, the legacy is there and the history is there. So he's kind of hunched over, so it's kind of hard to show you all of the stuff on the undersurface, but I think you can kind of more clearly see all of the ridges. It's kind of bumpy, it's not smooth. It's very much like lava. And then here you have the wings, not all the way opened, but sort of almost like a bat. It's furrowed, and you can see all of the little tiny, spines, easily broken. Luckily mine wasn't. We can kind of see all of that. All the little tiny spines kind of curving here. There's one here. There's another one right over here. There's a third one all the way down over here. So very delicate. And then from here, this is the back. You can kind of see, again, the wings, not fully unfurled, but actually almost like, covering him, because he's like walking. He hasn't stood up all the way straight. He's sort of crouched. And then I kind of like the pose of the left arm. It's almost like a wrestler, like his hands, like the claw. And then he's almost like flexing, right? He's doing like a flex with the left arm while the right one is holding that fire whip. So all these little tiny details, you can see the hoofs of his feet. It kind of reminds you of almost like the devil's cloven hoofs. So there's some inspiration from like the hoofs of a goat. It's like demonic. And then the claws. Now that I own it, you can kind of at your leisure see that there's like exactly 4 claws, right? And then of course he's holding the fire whip. And so just all these little tiny details. You look at the texture of the wings, and then also the tail itself, how it sits, as well as the molten rock over the body and the legs as well. So all of this stuff you get to appreciate, as well as the polystoned whip. So the center of this whip is a wire, and then they cast the resin or the polystone over it, okay? And then you get to see the awesome face. I'm gonna try to get a little bit closer here. So there you go. Hopefully you can kind of see that. You can see the details of the mouth, the tongue sticking out. So this is sort of like the classic Balrog portrait, mouth open, all the fire from inside the mouth. You can see the heat come out of the mouth. You can see the fangs, you know, the horns, and then that tongue coming right out there. And then just have the opportunity of not blurring out, not that having a macro view, just getting really, really close to show you all of that detail. As you get closer and closer, you can see how they painted it and kind of alternated between the paint. And it's almost like a scales, right? You can see the scales of the, you know, of his skin and the glow of the molten rock underneath it. So, you know, really cool. All the way along, and then you can see all of the horns and the ridges around the wings. Just kind of showing you all of that. There you go. It's also really cool that you don't see much of the molten lava on the undersurface or the ventral side of the Balrog. It's always on the dorsum or the back. And that's kind of like the coloration of certain, you know, crocodiles or snakes, where there's way more patterns on the upper side, the dorsal surface versus the ventral surface, which is the side that's always on the ground away from the sun. It's a lot more boring. It's always like, you know, a little bit more sort of a muted color, either beige or gray or whatnot. And all the interesting stuff is on the back. So I'm gonna shift back, and then we're gonna get back into our regular 4K view, hopefully. Hold on here, I'm just messing around, giving you various views, just playing around with it a little bit. We're basically trying to change, the camera back to the 4K, 4K version of this. If you look really closely, you can actually see the red also in the tail, and it becomes a little bit more subtle as you get all the way out to the end of the tail, finally sort of, you know, disappearing. But even to the tip, you can see little tiny bits of the flame, and they try to make it a little bit more subtle. Same thing with the legs. As it goes all the way down to the feet, you can see that there's a bit more yellow here or there. So, you know, they're doing their best. They're doing their best. Okay. All right, so hopefully have a much better idea of what he looks like in person. I'm giving you all sorts of views from different angles as I'm turning him around, what he looks like. It's sort of a rare opportunity because, believe it or not, I looked on YouTube. It's crazy. Like, the only other Daddy Rog YouTube video that's out there is from a collector named Josh Long, who is a member of the OneRing.net, and that's like a decade ago. This is like he's a big Sideshow Weta collector. He has quite a few pieces on his channel, but that's insane that after all this time, like, that's it, that's him. There's no other YouTube review of this amazing like Grail piece, and that means that no, you can't. There's nothing to enjoy. Like, unless you own it, you don't have a chance to admire it. Especially on 1080p or 4K. So I'm just trying to fill that gap, and talk about it, give you a chance to really admire it. All its detail over and over again from all the different aspects. You can kind of see everything and probably see even details that I'm missing. So yeah, it's quite a rare thing to have. And I think when Josh did it, it was way back, 10 years ago. He had just started his channel, so there was a lot of learning there. And he actually just shot it on a turntable like mine, but out in the sunlight, I think in front of his house or something. And so definitely it's very more difficult, right, to appreciate, the paint, the sculpt, all that. It was a very, very informal, rough, like maybe 10, 15 minute video, not like this behemoth. I'm just trying to go back and forth talking about it constantly. So for those of you who are, big Sideshow Weta fans, Balrog fans, and you don't own this piece, I'm trying to give you like the definitive treatment so you can basically see it over and over again. Now, there are a couple things about this Balrog that's like a little bit problematic, okay? And it's very well known. I don't want to say that. It's not well known, but from people who really want this piece, who've done the research, who's been looking for it, it's not a secret. So here are the things that have happened over the years. A large number of Balrogs, I don't want to say majority, but quite a large number of them have cracks along the fire whip. And this is not because of carelessness or, basically bad ownership or whatever. It's just that, in the center, there is a wire and you have the resin around the wire. And I think the prevailing theory is that maybe over time, the cracks will just slowly develop maybe. Or maybe it was just a little bit, I don't want to blame the collector, but it could be that when you're first putting them together, you're not as aware of the problem. And there is a very, very small hole on this wing, and there's a peg, there's a peg on the whip, and the peg actually goes into the hole. And to do it, you do have to kind of bend it a little bit, and it could be that if you don't do it carefully enough, the bend will crack the whip at one of the points along it. So of course, knowing this myself, when I put the whip into position, I was just very, very ginger, very, very careful, and I put it in just as much as I needed to. And as far as I can tell, looking over it very carefully, I don't think that there's any crack in the whip. And this whip is the one thing that's going to be very difficult to package properly once you've unpackaged it, because you have to sort of, again, bend it into a little circle. Once you've bent it, you can't unbend it. And I think when you start to unpackage it, that's where the cracks actually very easily appear. Probably what I would do if I were to have to pack them again would be to use a heat gun to soften the resin, and then, bend it into, never bend it too much, but even within a millimeter or two, kind of put in the original configuration to protect it in the packaging. But again, in this case, the heat gun is very, very useful because it's going to soften up the resin and prevent it, again, from cracking at its weak tension points. But luckily for me, I didn't have that problem. Again, this was brand new out of the box. But that was one very well-known problem, and a lot of Balrogs have those cracks. In fact, there's one on eBay right now where, in a way, he didn't mention it in the listing, which is not the best. But when I inquired if there was any issues, he did fess up and say that there was actually a break in the whip. He said it was a break in the tail, but we both know that it's actually a bend in the whip itself. Now, speaking of the tail, another problem with the Balrog, and I don't know whether this is going to be a problem with mine or not, is that over time, maybe it's because of the resin they were using, but the tail would over time slowly begin to sink under its weight, and eventually it would actually go all the way to the base, which, again, is not the end of the world. There's plenty of room here, but again, it kind of speaks to a defect or a improper, lazy casting of the resin that's not good enough quality, and over time, the support here begins to fall, and then it begins to go down. You could, of course, try to rectify that by using a heat gun. Again, heating up all the resin and slowly moving it back up, but it's not a very good solution. Luckily, of course, for me, I just opened this like 3 days ago, and so because of that, did I say 3 days ago? 3 days ago. So I just put it together 3 days ago. So of course I don't expect it to fall. You can see there's a huge, there's a huge amount of space between the tail and the base, and I hope it stays that way. But this is, again, another very, very well-known problem with the Daddy Rog. So that's number 2. Now, number 3, I like to critique the paint. Understanding again that this was literally 20 years ago, And, collectibles as a hobby was essentially just starting. You have to give them, again, some leeway. But I have to say that the paint on this is very, very crude in a sense, right? Like it's not a very complex paint job. So, again, remember, this was over 20 years ago, and this thing was essentially $300. Okay, $300 back in 2002, 2003. Like, what do you expect for $300? Whereas, it's like literally what, $10,000 for the Balrog bust Poda edition. So the standards have, of course, changed drastically. But if you look at this, it is just a little bit crude. There's not a lot of variety in the paint. It's just, it's black, shades of black, and then the little bits of orangey red, and you have a little bit of yellow. When you look at this, again, it's cool and all, but you definitely feel like there's a certain crudity again in the paint application. I think in the hands of a master painter, this could definitely be repainted to bring out way more details, way more texture, to really give you the illusion of burning lava on the inside. We only see the hint of it from the factory paint job. Again, a little bit of a blunt instrument to achieve that effect. But I've had like custom busts painted by, really people who know what they're doing, and they're able to really bring out the fire effects even with just paint without any light up as well. So that is kind of one of my complaints about the paint, which is, again, a sign of its time when it was produced, but a little bit, again, crude and unpolished, in my opinion. And then another thing is that for a 20-plus year collectible, and I've had this actually also see this with my Walt Disney Classics collection, which is porcelain. This is paint on porcelain fired in a kiln. But same thing is that paint can start flaking off. Maybe it's the primers are finally given out. This used to be a very big problem. The one that was the most infamous for that was the Sideshow's first Iron Man Mark III bust, where like a huge percentage of those busts, the paint, would you just touch it, and the paint would flake and flick right off, and like eggshells. And this was almost like they didn't primer it properly. But for the Balrog, this was never something that you heard about. And it's never anything that you really notice or that anybody who owns this has complained about. But when I went over it very carefully, there were some spots, here and there, where the paint was essentially flaking right off. And it could just be that over 20 plus years, the primer that the factory used wasn't very good quality. Maybe just temperature, humidity. A lot of these things can be explained. Like if you live in the swamps of Louisiana, or if you live in a very, very humid environment, like say in Florida, it could be that the tail is more likely to drift. There's more likely to be structural problems because of the humidity and the weather you live in. But absolutely, there were certain areas where, like for instance, areas like over here, you just touch it and the paint's really, really good. But in other areas, if you're not careful, you touch it, the paint will literally flake right off. And if you're not careful, gigantic swaths of it can just basically disappear. And the good news is that the good news is the entire Balrog didn't have that problem, but that would be a disaster. I would literally have to essentially, ship them to a painter to commission a repaint with a proper priming, if that were the problem. But luckily, it's self-limited to a few areas. And because of my previously mentioned criticism of how the paint is so crude, it's also, by the way, very easy to paint match. Child's play to just kind of get the blacks in there, mix a little bit of gray, and then you touch it up, and you basically can't even tell the areas where the paint flaked off. But I think that's worth noting, is that some of these pieces, especially they're like antiques now, 20, 30 years, this one came brand new out of the box, and so hadn't to be exposed to anything but just age, like time. It wasn't exposed to the elements, but it was in its box for literally 2+ decades. And over that time, the primer got weak. old, and then the paint is also very old and brittle, and so you're going to have little pieces flake off. And luckily, I only had this happen in 2 or 3 places, and I was able to pretty easily camouflage it myself. Because I mean, look at this. What are we looking at here? It's just black and orange. There's again not a lot of very subtle paint application, and I've been looking over this very, very closely, macro view, 4K, and I would challenge you to see where the paint touch-ups were on the Balrog. I think it's very, very hard to find, because again, not because I'm like good or anything. I'm horrible at painting, but this is so simple. Even I could color match and camouflage some of this stuff. So those are my main sort of criticisms of the statue. But again, taking a step back and look at it in all its glory, it's still just amazing, a Grail piece. Love the ability to admire the sculpt anytime I want. Very close detail, including the actual eyes and the horns, the mouth. It's got so much going for it. The authenticity, again, the fact that the sculptor who worked on the movie version also worked on this, the fact that this is a 20-plus-year-old piece, the fact that this is and still remains, I would say even at this time, even in 2024, it's still like the crown jewel of the Sideshow Weta collection. If there's one statue that's the king of them all, it would be the Balrog. Now, the cave troll Moria is a little bit more limited. It's only 750 to the 1,000. But still, when it comes to the popular imagination, it's still the Balrog that rules over them all, right? That rules over them all. So I think I've shown you about as much as I can. I've rambled on as long as I can. I've talked as long as I can. It's almost an hour. Really excited again to have this finally in my collection. I don't really collect Lord of the Rings statues, as you may or may not know, but this is definitely one that I make an exception for. Now I think I just have 3 statues from the Lord of the Rings. Well, no, I got more than that, but this is, I think, the only one from Sideshow Weta that I have. So very special. I'm really, really happy with it. And I won't be going hunting for any more. I mean, maybe if I can get a cave troll for a reasonable price, I might bite. Although I feel like the Weta cave troll is already kind of puts the original one to shame. Again, I did a review of that. I really, really like that one. So maybe if an original cave troll comes around, I might be tempted. But I'm more than happy with my artist proof Sideshow Weta Balrog right over here of Moria. And I'll end with this shot right over here. So again, hope you enjoyed sort of the history of the piece, managed to kind of get a look at all of the different details from different angles. And I gave you a little bit of my critique about some of the things that could have been done better, the structural issues, the design issues, again with the whip, the tail, and then of course the paint application. The old paint flaking off. I don't think that this is necessarily a widespread issue, but you never know. If it can occur to mine, it can occur to others. There's different batches. It depends on the primer that they used, the temperature, humidity of the day in that factory 20 years ago when they applied the paint. Who knows? But it is something to be aware of, especially, but again, I'm going to be putting this in a little display outside, out of the way, and it shouldn't be a problem. If you have it in glass, it's even better. But it's something to be aware of. Again, paint flaking off over time, just like the paint flaked off of my Cinderella's dress from the Walt Disney Classics collection. And that's supposed to be fired paint in a kiln. And still, it's just kind of flaked off because of time. The time is going to make a difference, for these collectibles. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, do take care.